The screen of my phone trembled in my hand, my father's words hanging in the static between us. "Jessica's bringing her boyfriend home for your mother's birthday. He's someone important, speaks well, carries himself properly." A deliberate pause. "And your job? Well, it isn't very comfortable to talk about. It's best if you don't come." My throat constricted as though invisible hands were tightening around it. The sleek Seattle skyline outside my office window, a view I'd earned through years of sacrifice, suddenly seemed to mock me. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles whitened, the contrast stark against the polished mahogany surface my assistant had insisted befitted a company co-founder. "What are you saying?" My voice emerged lower than intended, a dangerous calm I barely recognized. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family," he continued, his tone flattening with each syllable. "If you still insist on coming, don't call me your father." The call disconnected with a soft click that somehow echoed louder than any slam could have. In that moment, the transaction notification from my banking app flashed across my screen. The automatic monthly payment of $397.68 for my parents' utilities had just processed. Transfer complete. Just like the previous 23 months. Just like the $9,842.17 total I'd paid without a single acknowledgement. My name is Olivia. I'm 30 years old and the silent co-founder of a sustainable energy technology company called Pacific TerraTech. This is the story of how I finally made my family see me. I'd always believed family was everything. Growing up in our small town outside Seattle, I became expert at fading into backgrounds, stepping aside in family photos, quietly covering bills while my sister Jessica basked in the spotlight of parental adoration. In our home, she was the star. Her graduations, promotions, even breakups became family events. Meanwhile, I built a multi-million-dollar company that my parents still described as Olivia fiddles with computers somewhere in tech. The pain of their dismissal had become so familiar that I'd stopped recognizing it as pain. Until now. For 2 years, I'd been silently paying my parents' electricity, water, and internet bills. It started with a plaintive call from my mother about rising costs and insufficient retirement income. "If you could help us even a little, it would mean a lot," she'd said, her voice softening into that familiar tone that always preceded a request. I agreed, assuming it would be temporary. But temporary became permanent. Whenever I asked if Jessica contributed, my mother's deflections became a predictable script. "Your sister will pitch in next time," or "She's covering your father's medical expenses." I knew none of it was true, but I smiled and continued sending money, nearly $400 monthly without complaint or recognition. As I stared at my banking app, watching the transaction history scroll by, something hardened within me. Not grief or fury, just a cold certainty. I'd spent years being invisible, believing that quiet reliability would eventually earn me recognition. Instead, it had earned me exile from my mother's birthday celebration because I didn't fit their preferred image of a successful daughter. My fingers moved deliberately across the screen, navigating to the automatic payments section. One by one, I selected each utility payment, power, water, internet, and canceled them. Not out of vengeance, but self-preservation. The one thing they hadn't yet taken from me was my self-respect. As I pressed the final confirmation button, my hand shook, not from doubt, but from the terrifying realization that I was finally choosing myself after 3 decades of choosing them. A week later, my mother texted, "Just got a notice that the internet bill is due. Can you take care of it?" No mention of my father's words, no apology, just another request. I read the message, set my phone down, and returned to reviewing quarterly projections for our company's new solar initiative. My silence was not a statement. It was simply all I had left to give. That night, I dreamed of my childhood home, but in the dream, I couldn't find my bedroom, as if even in my subconscious, I had no place there. 2 weeks passed. My father called, then left a voicemail. The power company called. "This month's bill hasn't been paid. What's going on?" No concern, no reference to our last conversation. I listened once, then placed my phone face down on my desk. My mother's birthday arrived exactly 3 weeks after my father had told me not to come home. I imagined the scene. Her favorite roasted chicken, cake from her preferred bakery, relatives gathered around the dining table. Everyone except me. The same dining table where I'd sat for 25 years, accepting scraps of attention while Jessica feasted on praise and questions about when she'd marry, while I received sidelong glances and whispers about why I was still single, despite being so smart. At precisely 4 p.m., my phone lit up with my mother's name. I watched it ring until it stopped. My father called next, then Jessica. 3 calls in less than 10 minutes. I let them all go, feeling nothing but a hollow calm as I gazed out at the gathering storm clouds. The messages began arriving 10 minutes later. From Mom. Olivia, the power has been turned off. The entire house is dark. Please pay the bill. From Dad. No water. We can't cook. Handle it now. From Jessica. Internet's down. Guests are arriving. Please fix this urgently. I glanced at the clock. 5:12 p.m., exactly 3 weeks since I'd canceled the automatic payments, 3 weeks since my father had told me not to call him Dad anymore. And now, in the middle of the celebration I'd been deemed too embarrassing to attend, everything was shutting down. Power, water, internet, each vanishing precisely when needed most. I didn't respond. There was nothing to explain. I simply sat, rotating my coffee cup between my palms, watching raindrops trace jagged paths down my window. In that moment, I realized they weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because there was no one left to shoulder their weight. By 6 p.m., my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from extended family members. You embarrassed your mother in front of everyone. Your sister was right. People like you shouldn't show up on a happy day. I read each one without responding, not because silence meant agreement, but because I'd grown tired of explaining myself to people who always chose the louder voice over the quieter truth. The screen lit up again. Aunt Lauren, the only relative who still took time to look me in the eyes when it mattered. She was calling through an ancient video app that only she and I still used. I answered on the second ring. Her face appeared, partially obscured by the warm, yellow kitchen light behind her. A kitchen I knew intimately. Every cracked tile, every squeaky cabinet door. But tonight it looked different, filled with uncomfortable laughter and strained conversation. You're not going to pay for it, Olivia. Her tone was gentle, probing rather than accusing. I met her eyes through the screen. You know, Auntie, it was Dad who told me not to come. He said if I insisted on showing up, I shouldn't call him my father anymore. She fell silent. Behind her, the room erupted into chaos. My mother's voice cut through. Tell her I'm ashamed of her. On this day of all days, how could she do this? My father, sharp and impatient. It's not that serious. It's just paying a few bills. What kind of daughter gets petty over money? An uncle. Poor Jessica, having to deal with a sister like that. Footsteps approached. Jessica appeared behind Aunt Lauren, arms folded across her chest, lips twisted in annoyance. She even picked up the call? Mom's been crying all day. Does she even care? Seriously, no shame at all. I remained silent, watching this performance unfold like a play I'd seen too many times. I was about to end the call when another face appeared at the edge of the screen. A young man with perfectly combed hair and a dark suit. He glanced at me, then did a double take, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition. Hey, boss, he said, his voice cracking slightly as if uncertain whether those words belonged in this context. I froze, instinctively gripping my phone tighter. I hadn't expected this collision of worlds, not on the night I'd been deemed too shameful to attend a family gathering. I studied him for a moment before everything clicked. Of course, he was Hudson Kane, one of the new senior engineers from our southern branch who'd transferred to Seattle headquarters just 3 months ago. We'd exchanged emails about the renewable battery project. He'd sent me detailed reports, but I had no idea he was Jessica's boyfriend, the one everyone was trying to impress. The room behind Aunt Lauren went silent. I watched her glance over her shoulder as whispers began to ripple through the kitchen. Wait, what did he just call Olivia? Boss? Does that mean Olivia is Jessica's boyfriend's boss? The murmurs grew louder, overlapping in confusion. I remained still, neither confirming nor denying, simply waiting for the moment to play out. The young man straightened his posture, looked past the camera to the others in the room, and spoke clearly. In case you didn't know, I work at Pacific TerraTech. Ms. Olivia is one of the company's co-founders." His statement cut through the clatter of dishes and whispers, plunging the room into stunned silence. I pressed my lips together, offering a slight nod of confirmation. He returned his gaze to the screen, eyes wide with apprehension. "Hope your big introduction goes perfectly," I said evenly, then ended the call. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in years, not from satisfaction, but because the weight of invisibility had finally lifted. They had seen me, not as they wanted me to be, but as I actually was. When I closed my eyes, I could still see their faces, the exact moment when their carefully constructed narrative about who I was collapsed completely. The next morning, before sunlight had fully filtered through my blinds, I checked my emails as usual. Among meeting reminders and accounting notes was a name I didn't immediately recognize. Hudson Kane. I opened it. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were Jessica's sister. I've always respected you at the company." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back against my headboard as I continued reading. Hudson explained his shock at discovering our family connection. According to his email, Jessica had described me as a receptionist who helps with the tech company's paperwork and had never mentioned my leadership role. Then, without hedging, he wrote, "I didn't expect her to be like that. I'll be ending this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot before everyone." I set my phone on my chest and closed my eyes briefly. After a few minutes, I reopened my inbox and typed a measured response. "Hudson, that's your matter. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. Think carefully before you do anything. And for the record, I don't bring family into the workplace." I hit send. No further elaboration needed. Some things, once clarified, require nothing more. Around 10 a.m., while wrapping up a meeting with department heads, my phone vibrated. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. I declined the call. Not out of anger, but because I'd had enough of apologies that only materialized after everything had fallen apart. Within 5 minutes, a message arrived. "I'm sorry. I didn't think Hudson would change like that. You're his boss. If you said something, I'm sure he'd listen. Please talk to him. Ask him to come back to me." I walked to the hallway window, gazing out at the Seattle skyline as I composed my response. Hudson didn't leave because I told him to. He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you look down on what you don't understand, and how you always assume that with a soft enough voice, you can steer anyone. After sending it, I returned to my desk, but barely a minute later, another message appeared. "I know I messed up. This time I mean it. I'll change. Please believe me. Just this once." I read it, felt nothing stir within me, and gently deleted the message. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Sometimes the distance between two people isn't in the apology. It's in when the apology arrives. 2 weeks later, I heard through company channels that Hudson had requested a transfer back to our southern branch. I approved it immediately, no questions asked. A week later, I returned home from work to find my parents standing on my porch, each holding a small suitcase, their faces drawn with exhaustion from the journey. I didn't ask why they'd come. It wasn't a casual visit. I simply opened the door and invited them inside, not wanting to have the inevitable conversation where neighbors might overhear. We sat in my living room, steam still rising from the tea I'd prepared. My father spoke first, apologizing in a quieter tone than usual. My mother added that perhaps they'd gone too far, that things should never have reached this point. I remained silent, listening to determine whether this apology marked an ending or a beginning. As I'd expected, my father's tone gradually shifted. "We're family, Olivia, and family helps each other. We raised you, sent you to school. Everything you have now, a part of it comes from us, right?" I looked at him, my expression neutral but my posture straightening almost imperceptibly. Then my mother spoke, her voice gentle as though suggesting something entirely reasonable. "If you could maybe send us about $2,000 a month, just a little support. It's not much for someone like you." I studied the two people sitting in my living room, the same people who had excluded me from a family gathering because they thought I was an embarrassment. Now they sat in my house, placing a monetary value on their apology. $2,000 monthly because I was their daughter. Apparently, one of Jessica's friends had mentioned reading about Pacific TerraTech's latest funding round in a tech magazine, $47 million in venture capital, and suddenly I was worth reconciling with. A soft, involuntary laugh escaped me. Not loud or mocking, but the kind that emerges when someone tells a story that defies logic. My parents watched me expectantly, as though waiting for me to nod in agreement. But I wasn't angry. I'd traveled too far for that. I leaned back in my chair, voice steady. What about Jessica? How much will she be contributing each month? The room seemed to pause, the air growing dense. My father glanced at my mother, who responded carefully, her voice dropping slightly. Your sister's job. It's still unstable, and the breakup with Hudson has taken a toll on her. I nodded gently, unsurprised. The same excuses repackaged in sympathetic language, but ultimately just deflections. I raised my gaze, looking directly at them. If she agrees to support you with $2,000 per month, I'll do the same. No more, no less. They stared at me, trying to determine if I was serious. I continued quietly. Or if you want me to carry the full amount, I'll need something in writing, a legal agreement confirming that after you both pass, the house will belong to me in full. I sat still after that. No pressure, no further explanation, just waiting to see how they'd respond now that, for the first time, I was establishing terms for what they'd always considered my obligation. The silence felt like a physical presence between us, heavy with 30 years of unspoken expectations. As soon as I finished speaking, a heavy silence descended. My father suddenly rose to his feet, slamming his palm on the hardwood table and spilling tea across its surface. His shout reverberated through the room, his chest heaving with rage. You're setting conditions for your parents? We raised you for over 20 years and now you want to nickel and dime us like this? What kind of life are you living, huh? He shouted so loudly that I was certain my neighbors heard every word. But I didn't move or flinch, just sat with my hands resting on the armrests, my gaze steady, not cold but no longer gentle. I waited for him to finish before standing carefully. My voice emerged low and calm, yet clear enough to cut through the chaos he'd created. I think you both should leave my house. It wasn't a threat or spoken in anger, merely a request from someone who had reached the limits of what respect could endure. No one said anything else. Only the sound of luggage dragging across hardwood and the door closing behind them, quieter than everything they'd left unsaid. After they left, I stood at the window watching them walk away and realized that the familiar ache in my chest, the one I'd carried for decades, had finally begun to fade. It's been 2 years since I last saw them. I didn't block their numbers, change my email, or completely cut them off. I simply stopped reaching out and waited to see if they would still consider me family once I was no longer fulfilling my role as their silent supporter. In those 2 years, there has been no call asking how I am, no birthday acknowledgement, not even a simple, "How are you doing?" Jessica tried contacting me once, 6 months after our parents' visit, asking for a job recommendation I politely declined. I used to believe they would change, but I've realized that not everyone does, especially those who have never recognized they were wrong in the first place. And I still live here, work, and move through my days. The only difference is that I no longer allow myself to be an emotional ATM, ready to give and be damaged in the name of obligation. I've begun building relationships with people who see me clearly, colleagues who value my ideas, friends who call just to check in, even someone special who looks at me with genuine interest rather than expectation. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that family isn't a place where people can demand kindness and call it love. Real family is where you're valued as a person, not as a wallet, backup plan, or last resort when everything else fails. Before I close this chapter, I'd like to ask, was I wrong? Wrong to refuse $2,000 monthly to aging parents who raised me? I used to believe my family could fix anything, but after being treated like a stranger in my own home more times than I can count, I chose to stand up and break the cycle. Was I too cold? Perhaps. Or perhaps I was finally learning to value myself at exactly the right time.